My visions were right. Zimmerman and his trial. The Lookout made a story about how four of their witnesses changed the story, but we know how the press is. They're a bunch of bootlicking scum who lie about everything. I'm not particularly talking about this particular article and its author, but you know how it is. Now we go on to four witnesses in the Zimmerman trial have changed their story, and they were interviewed multiple times. 4 days after the shooting, one woman said she saw two guys running and then a fist fight, just fists. So, you know, people's perception is something that is never the same in a single event. So to judge what happened by someone's perception and take away their gun rights and take them to the hospital when they have important things to do and possibly ruin their entire life, say they have something important that they can't miss, once in a lifetime event, etc., etc., and go through their stuff at will like a bunch of Nazi Gestapo is not fair. It's not fair play. It's not just in the slightest bit. So at this point, I would like to draw to your attention the reason I say that. Specifically, it would be to do with my video about it's basically my video about psychiatry is something that I'm going to pull up right now for you. It's the reason why these people, these psychiatrists, these psychologists, these monsters, these devils, these evil people have duped us into believing that it's okay to let them be in charge and to kill our children and to drug to death people and use abortions and the pharmaceutical industries to limit the black populations, especially in urban neighborhoods of larger cities where they're easy to target.
Well, I did my own independent study based on people's personal testimony as they try to reach out to the masses about the injustice done to them. Patient 1 said hospital makes them worse. Patient 2 noticed cuts on hands that they had, and they were depressed.
I noticed cuts on their hands, basically.
Patient 3 had started smoking weed at 15, but had panic attacks.
The study involved over 300 patients. 250 had the same questions. And 50 were more extensively interviewed.
Panic attacks by itself, not related to weed. She mentioned she ran in
that's more than most studies.
And the effects wore off. This sounds like the effects of somebody panicking, not knowing what to do, rather than marijuana. Now, you go to patient 4, and they have a lot of statistics memorized, and she thinks she knows best. And I determined that it was a model given a biased report. I go to patient 5. It's a typical cheerleader type of lady. She blabbing on and on, like, oh my God, and contradicting themselves, and they want to talk to somebody so bad. Patient 6 was in electroshock therapy against their will and had reached out to people on YouTube because the psychiatrist was not agreeing with him. And they had the stigma of being labeled, and they brought up the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Analysis of Mental Disorders, which they say is fabricated. Patient 7 says that they're diagnosed with bipolar and manic disorders. They were forced, as well as the other patient, I believe it was patient 6, to have shock treatment, and that this person wanted to kill themselves and has night terrors, afraid of the treatment. Okay, and we go on to quotes from doctors themselves. Dr. John Breeding had mentioned that people are like animals that should be left to free, express themselves. He used the term of wild colts. You should watch his videos. He talks about how mental disorders are superficial and that people just need to express themselves and this kind of thing. Now, we go to Dr. Jeffrey Shaler. He says the only true political sin is independence, and he's quoting somebody else. And he's a psychologist, and he claims that nobody can understand if someone has a mental disorder based on lesions in their brains by looking at pictures or brain scans. And he says that psychiatrists had to invent their own book of diseases because pathologists won't have nothing to do with it. And that a pathological text is something that somebody has, as opposed to the DSM, which is a behavior that somebody else has observed in you. And he brings up how when you're in a situation where someone has more authority or in a higher position in society than you are, that they are able to easily manipulate the system and call it in and have you picked up for this perceived mental disorder, and that it was a mechanism of control. It's funny how he uses the same terms that I used prior to seeing his videos. Matter of fact, prior to the turn of the century. I've been saying this since I was about 13 years old. Now, we go on to I want to speak briefly about the history of mental psych wards and mental asylums. Years ago, people with epilepsy were considered witches or possessed by Satan, and these people were, quote, burned at the stake. Just 100 years ago, people with mental disabilities were regularly made to take cold baths so they were freezing, and they were electrocuted on a daily basis against their will. This was part of the outrage that was coming from the ancient psych wards and
more outrage,
which continues to this day, especially in New Zealand and Ontario, but also as well in America. So we get to another quote I'd like to bring up, is that this is myself, that I was inspired while watching the videos too.
The quote is, we have awoken a sleeping giant. And that is me, and I'd like to, at this point, quickly call out my channel names and wrap up this video. So, Nathan Turner, Platinum Location 1, Juku Lives, Errol Chuku, Ming Wu, Ibo Uku, and we have my friend Faye Nadia, and that is a rap. Zimmerman is a goon who is being put on the spotlight so they can drug us up to death using the pharmaceutical companies and keep convincing black people to abort their babies and live this kind of ghetto lifestyle that is conducive to the white power structure's domination of the world. Thank you.